One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked to the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or have ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table and went to sleep. In the middle of the night Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of his bed, walked toward his window, opened it up and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day again he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said, "Sorry, no." When his mother came home he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk and fell asleep. Once again he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road, when suddenly he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. The driver, a man named Mr. Harris, was shaken to his core. He had never hit anyone before, and the sight of Tom's lifeless body haunted him. He called the police and an ambulance, but there was nothing anyone could do. Tom was gone. Mr. Harris couldn't stop thinking about the picture. The girl in it seemed so familiar, yet he couldn't place her. He took the picture home with him, feeling an inexplicable connection to it. That night, Mr. Harris sat in his study, staring at the picture. The girl's smile was enchanting, but there was something eerie about her eyes. He decided to do some digging. He scanned the picture and uploaded it to his computer, then ran it through a reverse image search. Nothing came up. The next day, Mr. Harris visited the local library. He showed the picture to the librarian, Mrs. Thompson, who had been working there for decades. She looked at the picture carefully, adjusting her glasses. "I've seen this girl before," she said finally. "But I can't remember where. Give me some time, and I'll see what I can find." Mr. Harris thanked her and left, feeling a mix of hope and dread. He spent the rest of the day wandering around town, showing the picture to anyone who would look. No one recognized the girl. A few days later, Mrs. Thompson called Mr. Harris. She had found something. He rushed to the library, his heart pounding. Mrs. Thompson led him to a quiet corner of the library, where she had laid out several old newspapers and yearbooks. "I found her," she said, pointing to a yearbook from 1985. Her name was Emily. She went to the same school as Tom. Mr. Harris looked at the yearbook, his eyes widening. The girl in the picture was indeed Emily, but she looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a school uniform instead of a dress. "What happened to her?" Mr. Harris asked. Mrs. Thompson sighed. "She disappeared. One day she was there, the next she was gone. No one ever found out what happened to her." That night, Mr. Harris couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Emily and Tom. He decided to visit Tom's grave the next day. He wanted to pay his respects and maybe find some closure. As he stood by Tom's grave, he felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around and saw a figure standing by a nearby tree. It was Emily. She was wearing the same dress and red shoes from the picture. Mr. Harris approached her cautiously. "Emily?" he asked softly. She turned to look at him, her eyes sad. "Help me," she whispered. Mr. Harris was determined to help Emily. He started digging into her disappearance, talking to old classmates and teachers. He found out that Emily had been popular and well-liked, but she had also been secretive. No one knew much about her personal life. He visited the school archives and found Emily's old locker. It was still locked, untouched since her disappearance. He managed to get the school to open it for him. Inside, he found a diary. The diary was filled with Emily's thoughts and feelings. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, and her love for a boy named Tom. Mr. Harris was shocked. Could it be the same Tom? He read on, his heart racing. Emily wrote about a secret admirer who had been leaving her notes and gifts. She was flattered at first, but then the gifts became creepy. She started to feel scared. The last entry in the diary was dated the day before her disappearance. It read, "I think he's following me. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." Mr. Harris was more determined than ever to find out what happened to Emily. He started looking into the people who had been close to her. He found out that one of her classmates, a boy named Jake, had been obsessed with her. He visited Jake, who was now a middle-aged man living alone. Jake was surprised to see him but agreed to talk. He admitted to being obsessed with Emily but denied having anything to do with her disappearance. Mr. Harris didn't believe him. He decided to keep an eye on Jake, hoping to find some evidence. One night, Mr. Harris decided to break into Jake's house. He knew it was risky, but he had to find out the truth. He waited until Jake left for work and then snuck in through a window. He searched the house, his heart pounding. He found a box in the attic, hidden under a pile of old clothes. Inside the box were letters, photos, and a lock of hair. It was Emily's. Mr. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he had found the evidence he needed. He took the box and left, his mind racing. Mr. Harris went to the police with the evidence. They arrested Jake and questioned him. He confessed to everything. He had been stalking Emily, and when she rejected him, he got angry. He followed her one night and attacked her. He thought he had killed her, so he buried her in the woods. The police found Emily's body where Jake said it would be. They identified her from the picture Mr. Harris had found. Emily's family was devastated, but they were also relieved to finally know the truth. Emily's funeral was a small, private affair. Mr. Harris attended, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. He had helped Emily find justice, but he couldn't help feeling guilty for not being able to save her. As he stood by her grave, he felt a soft tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw Emily, smiling at him. "Thank you," she said softly, and then she was gone. Mr. Harris never forgot about Emily and Tom. He kept the picture of Emily on his desk, a reminder of the mystery he had solved and the justice he had brought. He also kept a picture of Tom, a reminder of the tragedy that had started it all. He visited Tom's grave often, talking to him as if he were still there. He told him about Emily, about how he had helped her, and about how he would never forget him. And so, the mystery of the girl in the picture was solved. But the memory of Tom and Emily lived on, a reminder of the power of curiosity and the importance of justice. In the quiet town of Oakdale, where life flowed as smoothly and calmly as the river that ran through its outskirts, an atmosphere of coziness and tranquility prevailed. But on this night, something had changed. The moon, hidden behind thick clouds, barely illuminated the cemetery where Harold, the local grave digger, worked. He was a simple man but with a firm character, accustomed to solitude and silence. Harold walked along the narrow path leading to the old section of the cemetery, where the souls of those who had departed many years ago rested. Suddenly, he heard the ringing of a bell. It was not an ordinary ring but an urgent, insistent one, as if someone was calling for help. Harold stopped and listened. The ringing repeated. He knew that sometimes children would sneak into the cemetery to play pranks, imitating the sounds of spirits. But this ringing was different. He headed towards the grave from which the sound was coming. It was the grave of Sarah O'Bannon, a woman who had died several months ago. Harold approached closer and saw that the bell attached to the copper tubing was indeed ringing. He leaned down and listened. "Are you Sarah O'Bannon?" he asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Yes," a voice from below the ground assured. "I am Sarah O'Bannon." Were you born on September 17, 1827? Harold continued, trying to remain calm. Yes. The voice replied again, full of desperation. The headstone says you died on February 19th, Harold said, feeling his heart begin to race. No, it was a mistake. I'm alive. Dig me up, set me free. The voice pleaded. Harold pondered. He knew that sometimes people were buried alive, and for such cases, coffins were made with holes and bells. But now it was August, and several months had passed since Sarah was buried. I'm sorry about this, ma'am, Harold said, stepping on the bell to silence it and plugging the copper tube with dirt. But it's August. Whatever you were down there, you ain't alive no more, and you ain't coming up. Harold returned home, but sleep eluded him. He sat by the window, gazing at the dark cemetery, and thought about what had happened. Sarah O'Bannon's voice wouldn't leave his mind. He decided that in the morning, he would go to the priest and tell him about the incident. The next morning, Harold went to the church. Father Michael, the local priest, was a wise and kind man. He listened to Harold attentively, without interrupting. Harold, Father Michael said when the gravedigger finished his story, I know this sounds strange, but sometimes the souls of the departed cannot find peace. Perhaps Sarah O'Bannon is trying to tell us something important. But what can I do? Harold asked, feeling a growing unease. Try talking to her, Father Michael suggested. Maybe she wants us to know or do something. Harold nodded and returned to the cemetery. He approached Sarah's grave and sat down next to it, listening to the silence. Sarah, he said softly, if you can hear me, let me know. For a moment, there was silence, and then he heard a faint ringing of the bell. Harold shuddered but decided to continue. What do you want to tell me? He asked. I am not dead, the voice from below the ground replied. It was a mistake. I was buried alive. But how is that possible? Harold asked, feeling his heart tighten with horror. I was ill, the voice continued. The doctors thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I woke up in the coffin, and I've been here ever since. Harold felt a chill run through him. He couldn't believe such a thing was possible, but Sarah's voice sounded so sincere that he couldn't help but believe her. What can I do? He asked, feeling his hands begin to tremble. Dig me up, the voice pleaded. Please, set me free. Harold returned home, feeling completely lost. He didn't know what to do. On one hand, he couldn't leave Sarah in such a state, but on the other, he feared that if he dug up the coffin, he would see something horrifying. He decided to speak with Drive Williams, the local doctor who had treated Sarah before her supposed death. Drive Williams was an experienced and respected man in the town. Harold hoped he could shed some light on this mystery. Drive Williams, Harold said as they sat in the doctor's office, I wanted to talk to you about Sarah O'Bannon. Sarah O'Bannon? Drive Williams asked, surprised. She died several months ago. What about her? I heard her voice, Harold said, feeling his heart begin to race. She says she was buried alive. Drive Williams looked at Harold with surprise, but then his expression became serious. Harold, he said, I know this sounds strange, but sometimes such things happen. Doctors can make mistakes. If Sarah is truly alive, we must do something. But what? Harold asked, feeling a growing desperation. We need to dig up the coffin and see what's inside, Drive Williams said. If Sarah is alive, we must free her. Harold nodded, feeling his heart tighten with fear. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't leave Sarah in such a state. The next day, Harold and Drive Williams went to the cemetery. They brought shovels and lanterns to light their way in the darkness. Harold felt his heart beating faster as they approached Sarah's grave. Are you ready? Drive Williams asked, looking at Harold. Yes, he replied, feeling his hands begin to tremble. They started digging. The earth was heavy and damp, but they didn't stop. Finally, they reached the coffin. Harold felt his heart ready to leap out of his chest. Open it, Drive Williams said, looking at Harold. Harold nodded and began to unscrew the lid of the coffin. His hands were shaking, but he didn't stop. Finally, the lid opened, and he saw Sarah. She lay motionless, her face pale, but she was breathing. "She's alive, drive," Williams whispered, feeling his heart tighten with horror. They lifted Sarah out of the coffin and carried her to Drive Williams's house. There, they began to treat her, trying to bring her back to life. Sarah was weak, but she was alive. Sarah slowly regained consciousness. She was weak and exhausted, but she was alive. Drive Williams and Harold took care of her, trying to bring her back to life. They fed her, gave her water, and treated her wounds. Sarah told them that she had been ill and the doctors thought she was dead. But she wasn't dead, she woke up in the coffin and had been buried alive ever since. She begged them to free her, and they did. The town was in shock from this news. People couldn't believe that such a thing was possible, but Sarah was alive, and that was the main thing. She had returned to life, and now she had a second chance. Sarah slowly returned to a normal life. She was weak, but she was alive, and that was the main thing. She began to walk around the town, meet people, and tell them her story. People were shocked, but they were glad she was alive. Harold and Drive Williams became the town's heroes. They had saved Sarah and brought her back to life. They were proud of what they had done and knew they had done it for the greater good. Sarah was grateful to them for everything they had done. She knew that without them, she wouldn't have survived. She was glad she had a second chance at life and decided to make the most of it. As Sarah returned to life, she began to remember details of her past. She recalled that before her supposed death, she had been involved in a secret matter related to her family. She decided she needed to get to the bottom of it to close this chapter of her life. Sarah began her investigation. She discovered that her family had been involved in dark dealings related to magic and the occult. She learned that her ancestors were powerful sorcerers and that their power was passed down from generation to generation. Sarah decided she needed to use this power to protect herself and her loved ones. She began studying magic and the occult, trying to understand how to use this power. As Sarah studied magic, she began to notice strange things happening in the town. People started disappearing, and no one knew where they had gone. Sarah decided she needed to get to the bottom of it to protect the town. She began her investigation and discovered that a dark force related to her family was behind the disappearances. She learned that her ancestors had been involved in a battle with this force and that the battle continued now. Sarah decided she needed to defeat this force to protect the town and her loved ones. She began preparing for the battle, studying magic and the occult, trying to become stronger. Sarah was ready for the battle. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to win. She gathered all her strength and went to face the dark force. The battle was fierce and long. Sarah used all her knowledge and power to win. She fought with desperation, knowing she had to win to protect the town and her loved ones. Finally, she won. The dark force was destroyed, and the town was saved. Sarah was glad she could protect her loved ones in the town. She knew she now had a second chance at life and decided to make the most of it. Sarah returned to a normal life. She was happy she could defeat the dark force and protect the town. She knew she now had a second chance at life and decided to make the most of it. She began helping people, using her knowledge and power. She became a healer and protector of the town, helping everyone who needed help. People were grateful to her for everything she had done and knew she would always be there to protect them. Sarah was happy she had a second chance at life. She knew she now had a purpose and decided to make the most of it to help people and protect them. Sarah O'Bannon's story became a legend in Oakdale. People told it to their children and grandchildren, knowing it was an example of strength and courage. Sarah became a symbol of hope and protection, and her name was forever engraved in the memory of the town's residents. Harold and Drive Williams were proud of what they had done. They knew they had saved Sarah and given her a second chance at life. They were glad they could help her and protect the town. Sarah was grateful to them for everything they had done. She knew that without them, she wouldn't have survived. She was glad she had a second chance at life and decided to make the most of it to help people and protect them. Sarah O'Bannon's story became an example of how strength and courage can defeat darkness and bring hope for the future. She became a legend, and her name was forever engraved in the memory of Oakdale's residents. The story of my uncle's encounter in the VA psych ward has become something of a family legend, whispered about in hushed tones and never spoken of directly in his presence. My aunt, who has always been the family's storyteller, first shared this tale with me when I was old enough to understand the gravity of what had happened. The details she provided were chilling, and they have stayed with me ever since. My uncle, a towering figure at 6 feet 4 inches with a build that could intimidate even the toughest of men, worked as a nurse for the Veterans Affairs, VA, hospital. His size and strength made him an asset in the psych ward, where physical restraint was sometimes necessary to protect patients and staff. He had stood in for nurses in the psych ward a few times before, but this particular night was different. It was a full moon, and his buddy, who also worked in the ward, warned him that things might get intense. My uncle, a man of logic and reason, laughed off the superstition and agreed to help out. As he entered the ward, he noticed an unusual tension in the air. The staff seemed on edge, and the patients were more agitated than usual. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the full moon's effect on people's moods. But as the night wore on, he began to understand why his buddy had warned him. The first sign of trouble came when a scrawny patient, who had been relatively calm earlier in the day, suddenly had a break from reality. The patient began thrashing and screaming, his eyes wild with fear and confusion. My uncle and 2 other nurses rushed to restrain him, but what happened next defied all logic and reason. As my uncle grabbed the patient's upper torso, he felt an eerie lightness, as if the patient was barely there. The other nurses struggled to hold down the patient's legs and arms, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. My uncle looked down and realized with a jolt of terror that the patient was floating above the floor. His eyes, which had been wild and frightened, began to change color, shifting from brown to a glowing, otherworldly green. My uncle's heart raced as he held onto the patient, fearing that if he let go, the patient would float away entirely. A 4th nurse rushed in with a high-strength sedative, which was usually effective immediately. But as the seconds ticked by, the patient continued to float, his eyes glowing brighter and brighter. My uncle's grip tightened, his muscles straining as he fought to keep the patient still. The sedative should have worked by now, but it seemed to have no effect. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly as my uncle held onto the patient, his mind racing with questions and fears. What was happening? Why wasn't the sedative working? And most importantly, how could this scrawny patient be floating? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the patient's eyes began to dim, and his body slowly sank back to the floor. The sedative had finally taken effect, but it had taken much longer than it should have. My uncle released his grip, his hands shaking as he stepped back, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The rest of the night passed in a blur. My uncle finished his shift, his mind still reeling from the encounter. He had always been a skeptic, debunking every ghost story and mention of the paranormal that came his way. But this was something he couldn't explain away with logic or reason. It was something that defied everything he believed in. When my aunt first told me this story, I was skeptical. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, not something that could happen in real life. But when I asked my uncle about it, his reaction was all the confirmation I needed. His face turned white, and he refused to speak about it. He has never returned to the psych ward, and he has never spoken about that night to anyone. The story of my uncle's encounter in the VA psych ward has become a cautionary tale in our family, a reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation. It has also taught me to respect the unknown and to never underestimate the power of the unexplained. But the story doesn't end there. As the years have passed, I have come to realize that my uncle's encounter was just the beginning of a much larger and more terrifying tale. A tale that involves not just my uncle, but our entire family and the dark secrets that have been buried for generations. My family has always been close-knit, with a strong sense of loyalty and tradition. We have our share of secrets, as all families do, but there is one secret that has been passed down through the generations, a secret that has been whispered about in hushed tones and never spoken of directly. It is a secret that involves the supernatural, the unexplained, and the dark forces that lurk in the shadows. The secret began with my great-grandfather, a man who was known for his strength and courage. He was a soldier in World War II, and he saw things that no man should ever have to see. But it was not the horrors of war that haunted him, it was something much darker and more sinister. My great-grandfather was stationed in a small village in Europe, a village that was said to be cursed. The villagers spoke of a dark force that had been unleashed upon them, a force that could not be seen or heard but could be felt in every corner of the village. My great-grandfather, a man of logic and reason, dismissed the stories as superstition. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, he began to understand why the villagers were so afraid. He started to notice strange things happening in the village. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut without warning, and the villagers would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming in terror. My great-grandfather tried to explain it away with logic and reason, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing with his own eyes. One night, as he was patrolling the village, he heard a scream coming from one of the houses. He rushed inside and found a young woman cowering in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed to the ceiling, where a dark shadow was moving, its form shifting and changing as it moved. My great-grandfather raised his gun, but before he could fire, the shadow disappeared, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The young woman told him that the shadow had been haunting her for weeks, that it had been following her everywhere she went. She begged him to help her, to protect her from the dark force that was tormenting her. My great-grandfather, a man of honor and duty, promised to do everything in his power to keep her safe. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, he began to realize that the dark force was not something that could be fought with guns or fists. It was something much more powerful and much more sinister. It was something that defied all logic and reason, something that could not be explained away with science or rational thought. My great-grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to understand the dark force that had haunted the village. He studied ancient texts, consulted with experts in the supernatural, and even traveled to remote corners of the world in search of answers. But he never found what he was looking for, and the secret of the dark force remained buried deep within our family. As the years passed, the secret was passed down from generation to generation, a whispered tale that was never spoken of directly. It was a secret that haunted our family, a secret that we all knew existed but never dared to explore. The night of the full moon in the VA psych ward was not the first time that the dark force had made its presence known in our family. It was not the first time that one of us had encountered something that defied all logic and reason, something that could not be explained away with science or rational thought. My uncle's encounter was just the beginning of a much larger and more terrifying tale, a tale that involves not just our family but the dark forces that have been lurking in the shadows for generations. As the years have passed, I have come to realize that the dark force is not something that can be ignored or dismissed. It is something that must be confronted, something that must be understood and defeated. It is a battle that has been waged for generations, a battle that has claimed the lives of many and left others forever changed. The story of my uncle's encounter in the VA psych ward is just one chapter in a much larger and more terrifying tale. It is a tale that involves the supernatural, the unexplained, and the dark forces that lurk in the shadows. It is a tale that has been passed down through the generations, a whispered secret that has haunted our family for years. But it is also a tale of courage, of honor, and of duty. It is a tale of a family that has stood together in the face of darkness, a family that has fought to protect each other and to keep the dark force at bay. It is a tale that has been passed down from generation to generation, a tale that has shaped our family and defined who we are. As I sit here, writing this story, I am reminded of the words of my great-grandfather, a man who spent his life trying to understand the dark force that had haunted the village. He once said, "The greatest battles are not fought on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of men. It is there that we must stand firm, that we must fight for what we believe in, and that we must never give up, no matter how dark the night may be." Those words have stayed with me, a reminder of the battle that has been waged for generations, a battle that has claimed the lives of many and left others forever changed. It is a battle that we must continue to fight, a battle that we must never give up on, no matter how dark the night may be. The story of my uncle's encounter in the VA psych ward is just one chapter in a much larger and more terrifying tale. It is a tale that involves the supernatural, the unexplained, and the dark forces that lurk in the shadows. It is a tale that has been passed down through the generations, a whispered secret that has haunted our family for years. But it is also a tale of courage, of honor, and of duty. It is a tale of a family that has stood together in the face of darkness, a family that has fought to protect each other and to keep the dark force at bay. It is a tale that has been passed down from generation to generation, a tale that has shaped our family and defined who we are. As I sit here, writing this story, I am reminded of the words of my great-grandfather, a man who spent his life trying to understand the dark force that had haunted the village. He once said, "The greatest battles are not fought on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of men. It is there that we must stand firm, that we must fight for what we believe in, and that we must never give up, no matter how dark the night may be." Those words have stayed with me, a reminder of the battle that has been waged for generations, a battle that has claimed the lives of many and left others forever changed. It is a battle that we must continue to fight, a battle that we must never give up on, no matter how dark the night may be. My 4-year-old daughter, Emily, was supposedly asleep when I heard noises coming from her upstairs bedroom. It was a quiet night, the kind where every creak and whisper seems amplified. I tried to listen but could not make out what was being said. The murmurs were soft, almost like a distant conversation. I approached the room, and the voices stopped abruptly. Thinking I had alarmed her, I gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. At the time, Emily was sharing the room with her 3-year-old sister, Lily. I walked in and saw Emily sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and alert. I smiled and asked, "Is everything okay?" Emily nodded and said, "Fine," but Lily sat up and added, "They were keeping me up." I was confused. "Who was keeping you up?" I asked, looking at Emily. Emily looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Sorry, Daddy. I was talking." "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Lily sat up straighter and said, "The girl in the window. She said you were coming." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at the window, which was closed and curtained. There was no one there. I asked, "Who is the girl in the window?" Both girls looked at me with innocent eyes. Emily said, "A girl comes and stands in front of the window at night and talks to us." Not knowing what to say, I replied, "Okay," and tucked them in. I hung around outside their door for a while, listening, but heard nothing more. The next day, I asked the girls about the girl in the window. They said she had come back but was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. Emily said the girl in the window was still mad. I tried to brush it off as childhood imagination, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. About a week later, my wife, Sarah, asked, "Who are the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and found both girls sitting under the window, looking up. They turned and looked at me and asked, "Do you want to meet the girl?" When they turned around, disappointed, they said, "The girl left." It has been about 5 years since that night, and I have not heard about the girl in the window since then. But the memory of that night still haunts me. As the years passed, life returned to normal. Emily and Lily grew older, and the incident with the girl in the window faded into a distant memory. But every now and then, I would catch myself glancing at the window in their old bedroom, half expecting to see a figure standing there. One evening, as I was putting away some old toys in the attic, I found a small, worn-out diary. It belonged to Emily, and as I flipped through the pages, I noticed several entries about the girl in the window. The entries were dated around the time of the incident, and they described the girl in vivid detail. According to Emily's diary, the girl had long, dark hair and wore a white dress. She would appear at the window every night, talking to the girls in a soft, whispering voice. The entries also mentioned that the girl was always sad and seemed to be looking for something. I showed the diary to Sarah, and we decided to keep an eye on the girls, just in case. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, nothing unusual happened. The girl in the window seemed to have vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to dig into the history of our house. I visited the local library and spent hours poring over old newspapers and records. I discovered that our house had a dark past. According to the records, a family had lived in the house in the early 1900s. They had a daughter named Clara, who was around the same age as Emily and Lily. Clara had disappeared one night, and her body was never found. The family had searched for her for years, but eventually, they gave up and moved away. The house had changed hands several times over the years, and each new owner reported strange occurrences. Some claimed to have seen a ghostly figure standing at the window, while others heard whispers and murmurs in the night. I shared my findings with Sarah, and we decided to keep the information to ourselves. We didn't want to scare the girls or fuel their imagination. but the thought of Clara's spirit lingering in our house was unsettling. Years passed, and the girls grew into teenagers. They had long forgotten about the girl in the window, and life seemed to have returned to normal. But one night, as I was walking past their old bedroom, I heard a soft whisper. I stopped and listened, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, and I could make out the words. It was a girl's voice, pleading for help. I rushed into the room and found Emily and Lily standing by the window, their eyes wide with fear. "Dad, she's back," Emily said, her voice trembling. I looked at the window, and for a moment, I thought I saw a faint figure standing there. But as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. I turned to the girls and asked, "Who's back?" "The girl in the window," Lily said. "She's been coming back every night, asking for our help." I was shocked. I had hoped that the incident was a one-time occurrence, but it seemed that Clara's spirit was still lingering in our house, seeking help. I decided to take matters into my own hands and find a way to help Clara find peace. I spent the next few days researching ways to communicate with spirits. I read books, watched documentaries, and even consulted a medium. I learned that spirits often linger in the physical world because they have unfinished business or are seeking closure. I decided to hold a séance in the hopes of communicating with Clara's spirit. I invited the medium to our house, and we gathered in the girls' old bedroom. The medium lit some candles and began to chant, calling out to Clara's spirit. After a few minutes, the room grew cold, and I could feel a presence in the room. The medium's eyes rolled back, and she began to speak in a soft, whispering voice. It was Clara's voice, pleading for help. I asked Clara what she needed, and she replied that she was looking for her family. She had been separated from them and was unable to find her way back. I promised Clara that I would help her find her family and bring them together. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly to find Clara's family. I searched through old records, contacted distant relatives, and even hired a private investigator. Finally, after months of searching, I found Clara's family. They were overjoyed to hear that Clara's spirit was still lingering in our house and agreed to come for a séance. We gathered in the girls' old bedroom, and the medium began to chant, calling out to Clara's spirit. As the room grew cold, Clara's spirit appeared, and she was reunited with her family. They embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. Clara thanked me for my help and promised to watch over our family. As Clara's spirit faded away, the room grew warm again, and the presence vanished. I looked at the window, and for the first time in years, it felt peaceful. Clara's spirit had finally found peace, and our house was free from her lingering presence. The incident with Clara's spirit had a profound impact on our family. We became more aware of the unseen world around us and learned to appreciate the mysteries of life. The girls grew into strong, independent women, and our family bond grew stronger. As I look back on that night when I first heard the noises coming from the girls' bedroom, I realized that it was a turning point in our lives. It was the night when we were introduced to the world of spirits and the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. And as I sit here, writing this story, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards Clara's spirit. She may have been a source of fear and uncertainty at first, but in the end, she brought our family closer and taught us valuable lessons about life, death, and the world beyond. I was super excited to get my first apartment. It was in an old antebellum house that was split into 4 units. Very cool place to live. However, every time I was taking a shower, I would get this overwhelmingly creepy feeling. Like somebody was watching me. Then the dreams started. I kept dreaming about this old lady in a pink nightgown. Sometimes she just looked frail and sweet, and she'd say that I should go with her. She never said where we'd go. Other times, the dreams were terrifying. Her eye sockets were empty. Her hair was greasy, stringy, and falling out. Her mouth was twisted in a tormented scream. And she'd frantically claw the air trying to grab me. The longer I lived there, the more menacing the dreams got. Also, the feeling of unease and the feeling of being watched in the shower increased dramatically. By the time we moved out, I couldn't close my eyes in the shower. It sounds silly, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I was going to die or lose my soul or something if I had my eyes closed too long. After moving out, I discussed all these weird feelings with a friend of mine who had recently moved into a house across the street from the old apartment. I was trying to laugh it off. He said that another friend of his used to live in the apartment above mine several years ago. An old lady died in what used to be my apartment. Nobody else wanted to live in that unit for more than a couple of months at a time. The building recently burned down. The fire started in my old apartment. They still don't know what started the fire. Still creeps me out. The antebellum house was a grand structure, standing tall and proud despite its age. The white paint was chipping in places, and the wooden porch creaked underfoot, but it had a certain charm that drew me in. The house was split into 4 units, each with its own unique character. My apartment was on the ground floor, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The high ceilings and ornate moldings gave it an air of elegance, and I couldn't believe my luck when I found it. The first few weeks were a dream. I loved the spacious rooms, the hardwood floors, and the sense of history that permeated the walls. But it wasn't long before I started to notice something strange. Every time I took a shower, I would get this overwhelmingly creepy feeling. It was as if someone was watching me, their eyes boring into my back. I would quickly finish my shower, my heart pounding in my chest, and rush out of the bathroom, feeling relieved to be back in the safety of my bedroom. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I had always been a bit of a worrier, and I figured that the old house was just playing tricks on my mind. But then the dreams started. They were vivid and unsettling, and they always featured the same old lady in a pink nightgown. Sometimes she would appear frail and sweet, her voice soft and inviting as she told me to go with her. But she never said where we would go, and I always woke up with a sense of unease. Other times, the dreams were terrifying. The old lady's eye sockets were empty, her hair greasy and stringy, falling out in clumps. Her mouth was twisted in a tormented scream, and she would frantically claw the air, trying to grab me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and it would take me hours to fall back asleep. As the weeks turned into months, the dreams became more frequent and more menacing. The old lady's appearance grew more grotesque, and her attempts to grab me became more desperate. I started to dread going to sleep, knowing that I would be haunted by her presence. The feeling of unease in the shower also increased dramatically. I would stand under the hot water, my eyes wide open, too afraid to close them. I had this overwhelming feeling that if I closed my eyes for too long, something terrible would happen. I would die or lose my soul or something. It sounds silly, but the fear was real and palpable. After moving out, I discussed all these weird feelings with a friend of mine who had recently moved into a house across the street from the old apartment. I was trying to laugh it off, to make light of the situation, but he listened intently, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. He told me that another friend of his used to live in the apartment above mine several years ago. An old lady had died in what used to be my apartment. Nobody else wanted to live in that unit for more than a couple of months at a time. The building recently burned down, and the fire started in my old apartment. They still don't know what started the fire. Even after moving out, the dreams continued. The old lady in the pink nightgown still visited me, her presence as unsettling as ever. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, and I would lie there, too afraid to move. I started to research the history of the antebellum house, hoping to find some answers. I discovered that the house had a long and troubled past. It had been built in the early 19th century and had seen its share of tragedy. Several people had died in the house over the years, and there were rumors of it being haunted. I became obsessed with finding out more about the old lady in the pink nightgown. I spent hours in the local library, poring over old newspapers and records, trying to piece together her story. I discovered that her name was Elizabeth, and she had lived in the house for many years before her death. Elizabeth had been a kind and gentle woman, known for her generosity and compassion. But she had also been plagued by tragedy. Her husband had died young, leaving her to raise their children alone. One by one, her children had moved away, and she had been left to live out her days in the old house, alone and forgotten. One night, as I lay in bed, the old lady in the pink nightgown appeared to me again. But this time, she looked different. Her eyes were no longer empty, and her hair was neatly combed. She smiled at me, her expression one of peace and contentment. She told me that she had been trying to warn me, to protect me from the darkness that had taken root in the old house. She said that the house was cursed, and that anyone who lived there was in danger. She thanked me for listening to her, for trying to understand, and then she disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness. After that night, the dreams stopped. I no longer felt the creepy sensation of being watched in the shower, and I was able to sleep peacefully once again. But the memory of the old lady in the pink nightgown stayed with me, a constant reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. I often think about the antebellum house, about the tragedies that had taken place within its walls. I wonder if the house is still standing, if it still holds the same dark secrets. And I wonder if the old lady in the pink nightgown is still there, watching over those who dare to enter, trying to protect them from the darkness that lurks within. Years have passed since I moved out of the antebellum house, but the memories of my time there still haunt me. I often find myself thinking about Elizabeth, about the kindness and compassion that she showed in life, and the protection that she offered in death. I have moved on, started a new life in a new place. But I will never forget the old lady in the pink nightgown, and the lessons that she taught me. I will always be grateful to her, for her guidance and her protection, and for the strength that she gave me to face the darkness that threatened to consume me. And so, my story comes to an end. But the memory of the old lady in the pink nightgown will always be with me, a constant reminder of the power of kindness and compassion, and the strength that lies within us all to face the darkness and emerge victorious.